Could these running backs be busts in fantasy football for 2025? Before you throw a ginormous fit in the comments, why don't you just watch the video and listen to what we have to say? Because we're honestly going to present both sides of the case here. The first one's a prime example. Christian McCaffrey. Look, I think it's pretty obvious why Christian McCaffrey could be a bust in fantasy football in 2025. And nobody should argue with the idea that, and you're going to say, well, any running back could be a bust.
Yes.
Christian McCaffrey is one of the riskier first-round picks in fantasy football this year. There's no way around it. When you're talking about a guy that has had issues with both of his calves, this for a running back, we don't mess with calves injuries. We're Pacers fans. We got Tyrese Halliburton out here playing on it. We don't mess with calf injuries, right? Especially when you're running the ball. A running back does quite a bit of that. It's pretty risky to draft CMC. Nobody ever knows, I think, if he will ever be the Christian McCaffrey that he was, again, just simply because now he says he's full strength, the coach says he's full strength, the team says he's full strength, which is great. And again, I'm not advocating not to draft Christian McCaffrey at all. I'm not going to say that. I still think Christian McCaffrey is a good pick. And ultimately, you could draft Christian McCaffrey and he could completely bust and lose you a league, which Christian McCaffrey has done multiple times, by the way, in the last 6 years. Multiple times. The other thing that Christian McCaffrey does is you draft him, he wins you a league. And so it's basically, while the risk score for Christian McCaffrey is going to be extremely high, you also have to acknowledge the upside score is as high. He is a 10 risk, he is a 10 upside. There's no way around either. He either is going to win you or lose you a league. There is no doubt. Now that is, so acknowledging that he could be a bust, again, doesn't mean you shouldn't draft him. It's basically just saying you're taking an all or nothing shot, and there's practically no in between with Christian McCaffrey. Whereas if you're drafting any of the other guys in the first round, whether it be a wide receiver or another running back, the range of outcomes slims down a little bit to where if they suck, you're not going to be buried because unless they have like a season-ending crazy injury, which would be an outlier for somebody like Bijan or Gibbs because they don't have a prior injury history and they're not as old as Christian McCaffrey. It's not going to lower your team's floor as much as it would for Christian McCaffrey getting hurt. But those guys don't have the league-breaking upside that Christian McCaffrey has. And so when you're talking about McCaffrey, whether or not it's worth it to take the risk, I think it all depends on the price. If you're playing in a league where, like almost pretty much every fantasy football league in 2025, he's going to be going in the first round. And there you basically have to make a decision for yourself. Do you think he's going to stay healthy an entire season? Do you think that he is going to be able to stay on the field? Do you think that he is going to be able to be productive in that offense still? I think if he's healthy, he's productive. I do. And so for that reason, I'm not going to walk away this year with 0 Christian McCaffrey shares. But I will say this. If I have multiple fantasy teams this year, I will have 1 Christian McCaffrey, and that is it. Because I will not let him tank multiple of my teams. He is not an overwhelming smash pick in the first round. I don't think any of you would argue that either. But at the same time, Christian McCaffrey possesses the upside to win you a fantasy football league. And while that's important, we would be stupid not to acknowledge that he could also lose it for you and that he could be a bust candidate in 2025. Again, I'm not saying not to draft him. I think you probably still should. If you only have 1 fantasy league, though, McCaffrey's pretty risky to draft in the first round. I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty risky. So
yeah, and ultimately, if you're drafting in the late first round of your fantasy draft, like you are faced with when you're looking at the strategy that you have across your draft, you go wide receiver or running back in the first round. CMC is really the guy right smack in the middle of the late first round, mid to late, where you're gonna think about taking a shot on him or a wide receiver, and he is sandwiched right now an underdog right between Puka Nacua and Malik Neighbors. And at that price right now, I think I'd rather just comfortably take a shot on one of those wide receivers with their high target volume and upside than the potential downside of a CMC. So next running back that we're going to have here that I personally am a little more confident is going to disappoint this year is James Cook. And this is not just because of all the offseason drama. I think at the end of the day, ultimately, running backs don't have the non-elite level running backs don't have a ton of leverage when it comes to contract negotiation. So I think James Cook plays for the Buffalo Bills week 1, and I think he plays the entire season barring injury. Historically speaking, with the production profile that a guy like James Cook has, those types of running backs don't generally have a ton of super long-term sustained success, at least in the way that he's been producing the last couple of years. Right now, he is at running back 14 prices, which you're like, oh, that's a high-end running back too. Don't think high-end running back too. Think about the running backs that are also going in that range, because you also got to talk about the volatility of running backs, the guys that stay healthy. Some of those guys that are being ranked in the mid running back 2 range right now are going to find themselves as a high or a mid to low on running back 1 just because of injury, volatility, all of that stuff. Running back 14 prices in the middle of the 4th round is very, very expensive. His ADP right now is 42.6. That is putting him in the price range of some other positional guys. Tet McMillan, Xavier Worthy, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Travis Hunter, Omarion Hampton is right there. You've got George Kittle going in that range. Rushing upside QBs like Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels right there by James Cook, Mike Evans, Kyron Williams. So, I mean, a lot of those guys, not every single one of them I prefer objectively over James Cook, but most of them I do. And the reason being, like, when you're looking at James Cook and where his production came from last season, it was mainly high volume of touchdowns. It was 16 touchdowns on the ground, 2 in the air. His receiving upside, which was a plus to his production in 2023 and kind of elevated his production that year, actually went down. He went from 54 targets in 2023 to 38 targets. You know what that tells me? That tells me that his floor is going to go way down. It did go way down last year. He had some really, really bad weeks as well as some good ones as well. But even the games where he had double-digit points, 20-plus points, he had a 28-pointer in Miami and a 25-pointer in Detroit and New England at the end of the season. He had a 26-pointer in Seattle, so that's like 4 25-plus point games, which is very good. The rest was all teens or single digits. He also had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in single digits. So a very hit or miss. Again, the lack of consistent receiving upside showed you how much that brought down his consistency on a week-to-week basis, which does matter in fantasy, right? Then you look at his efficiency on the ground, 4.8 yards per carry, which again, that's above average. That's very good. But his overall volume in terms of carries for a run-heavy offense, he only had 207 rushing attempts. Which, again, this isn't like some super pass-heavy offense in that, like, they have a ton of star power at the wide receiver position. Like, they transitioned from a very strong passing game to more run-first, run-heavy type of offense, which ultimately resulted in that roster being a lot more, or that team being a lot more successful. When you look at his true yards per carry, it's not as good as his actual yards per carry, 4.5 yards per carry, which again is taking into account or not factoring in the breakaway runs, which are a little more volatile. All this to say with James Cook, I'm not necessarily counting on him maintaining the touchdown production that he had last season, while also and I don't think his receiving usage is going to go up. You saw that go down. There's a trend. It's going down. And the rushing yards didn't change. He went from 1,100 yards in 2023 to 1,000 yards in 2024. Carries went down, targets went down, touchdowns went up. So when you're looking at all those metrics, which ones can you count on actually staying the same? You always count on the volume staying the same, right? Not the touchdowns. That's like strategy point numero uno for fantasy football, is you never count on touchdowns consistently coming to a guy who has never demonstrated in his career that he can maintain that. 3 touchdowns in 2022, 6 touchdowns in 2023, 18 in 2024. You tell me which one's the outlier, right? So really as simple as that. I think as a high-end running back 2 at price right now, not as big of a fan of taking him. There is a price point and a point where James Cook could fall in fantasy drafts where I'm totally cool with you taking him. If he falls below or in the range of Chuba Hubbard and Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, I'm okay with you taking him at that price. Around guys like Jalen Waddle and Rome Odunze and Addison at wide receiver, like, you can take a shot on him. I'm cool with that. He's going at least a round higher than I'm comfortable with right now.
The next guy that could end up being a bust for fantasy football this year is DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. To our wild surprise, we were extremely surprised that Swifty wasn't replaced in the draft. Honestly, we thought with a new offensive coordinator, with Swift really not being all that good. I mean, DeAndre Swift averaged 3.8 yards per carry last year. He averaged 12.6 fantasy points per game. You know, believe it or not, he's been pretty consistent, especially the last 3 years in fantasy football. 13.7, 12.5, 12.6 points per game. He's consistently, on a points per game perspective, a running back 2. And he could easily be that this year. When you look at where he's being drafted as well, the running back 26 right now, you might say, okay, well, if he's going to be a running back 2, he might end up being a good value. I agree with that. However, with DeAndre Swift, it's probably worth mentioning, the potential downsides to DeAndre Swift. First, last year was the first year that DeAndre Swift played a full season in his career. He normally misses 3 to 4 games on average. Second, again, he was extremely inefficient when you're talking about his opportunity. He was actually top 10 in opportunity, 10th in snap share, 7th in opportunity share. When you're looking at his efficiency, he was abysmal. 59th in true yards per carry, 36th in yards per touch, 39th in yards created per touch. And so You're looking at that, and then you're picking out, some of the good things about DeAndre Swift. He was 5th in yards per reception, which is fantastic. But again, outside of that, he was running a lot of routes, but his targets were 15th in the league. He was 10th in carries. Again, the volume really wasn't the issue there. The issue is his efficiency. And with Swift, I mean, you're talking about an offense that should be, we've seen it in Detroit, be friendly to running backs and really prop up running back production. However, the thing with Swift is, and then really the other thing the other argument you can make against him being somebody that will bust is, who else is there? Roshan, Kyle Monangai, Travis Homer. I honestly can't. I don't know.
The who else is there is the entire receiving core, and how much are they going to pass the ball versus run the ball?
I know, but it's a Ben Johnson offense, and so it's like I feel like they're not going to have anybody else to give the ball to. I feel like the only. Right. I mean, at running back 26 prices, I feel like the only thing that would really take away from him actually having a good season would be injury. Now, I will say this. He's going around like Judkins and Johnson, and I like those guys better. But again, situationally, like, would I rather have a running back in a Ben Johnson Bears offense or an Arthur Smith Pittsburgh offense? And Arthur Smith runs the ball a fair amount, but you kind of see what's the worst case for Swifty?
I think worst case, it's probably a high-end running back thing. High-end running back 3. I think best case, it's what he's been doing for the last 5 years,
15
which is
points per game.
Mid to low-end running back 2. Yeah,
that's what he's been. I don't honestly like thinking about this. I think people perceive him as somebody who could be a bust candidate, but honestly, he might honestly be underdrafted
because everyone's so well. I think the biggest reason for why is because all these wide receivers, look at where all these wide receivers and even Loveland are going right now in drafts. It gets crowded. You got DJ Moore at wide receiver 23, ADP 41, which means he's going in the 4th round. You have Odunze going at the very beginning of the 6th round, and then you have Luther Burden going in the 10th round. So, and then Loveland is going right around there, I believe, as well. I think he's also going in the 10th round. Yeah, 11th round. So, I mean, that's 4 offensive weapons, 4 receiving weapons that are going in the top 11 rounds of one offense. And then DeAndre Swift is kind of almost the afterthought, even though he's the guy that's actually getting he's the lead guy in the run game.
Right.
Because it's crowded, but you don't look at it being a crowded offense for running backs versus receivers. You look at it for the receivers. You look at it in the group of the passing game versus the group of the running game, right? And in the running game, it's way less crowded because they're not just going to not run the ball because they have all these receiving weapons.
They're not. It's a Ben Johnson offense. He's not going to not run the ball.
He runs the ball.
Correct.
So I'm with you.
All right, cool.
Yeah. Chuba Hubbard is actually I just mentioned Chuba Hubbard when I was talking about James Cook, and honestly, I mean, when you see the full round gap between where James Cook's going versus Chuba, I think Chuba is a way better price. And the reason that people are going to advocate for someone like Chuba being a bust, which I think is very understandable, is you're going to have a passing game that looks way different than what it did last year. And I know you have to compare a passing game to running game differently in the same offense, but I will say the impact that the receiving game is going to have this year in Carolina's offense is going to be night and day compared to what it was last season, where really they had to kind of rely on the success of Chuba Hubbard, and then Bryce Young had to come on towards the end of the season and then get the ball to freaking Adam Thielen and Jalen Coker. You're going to have a lot more receiving impact, specifically in the red zone, and I think that's what might be the biggest concern with Chuba Hubbard, who did have last season in total touchdowns. I think he had like 11 total touchdowns, which honestly, I mean, that's pretty dang sustainable if you ask me. 1 receiving touchdown, 10 on the ground. If this were like James Cook with 18 touchdowns, I'd be like, yeah, that's going down. But here's the thing: if you're concerned about the receiving game having an impact on someone like on Chuba and what he can do specifically in the red zone, the red area, like. I don't know, man. I think this is very sustainable. He has more volume than James Cook, 250 carries in 15 games. He has more receiving capability, 54 targets in 15 games, and just more overall production with less touchdowns. He was 16.1 points per game last season, which was 13th among running backs. And I'll tell you what, this year, barring injury, I think he's going to be okay. The biggest concern that you're going to have here is Rico Dowdle entering that offense as well. I think that's a relevant thing to talk about. Chuba Hubbard surprised all of us last season, right? He looked really good. He gets his contract extension in the middle of the season. we're all happy for him. Rico Dowdle actually had a pretty productive season, especially the second half of the year when Dak went down with the injury last year. And then they just signed him as well to back up or potentially eat into the opportunity that Chuba was getting in that offense. Even though Chuba had a lot of volume, it wasn't. It was on the low end of bell cow level volume. He had 250 carries, right, in 15 games, which again is very good. Is there a scenario where they decide that they want to ride with someone like Rico and give him carries and then use Chuba more consistently on passing down sets? That is a possibility, and it depends on how good. It depends on how well Bryce Young continues to develop, how good Ted McMillan looks. If they want to start running more of those sets, maybe Chuba gets more dump-off options. I think regardless, no matter which way you cut it, I think that Chuba probably is going to be capable of sustaining this production, and I would bet on him being a high-end running back too. I think at running back 13, you're not going to get super high. You're not going to get much more upside opportunity than where he's going. I said running back 13. Running back 16 right now is where his price is at. You're probably not going to see him produce any better than like a low-end running back 1. So again, the upside isn't going to be that of someone like Alvin Kamara going at RB19 prices who could finish as a top 5 running back. Right, you don't have Omarion Hampton going back-to-back with Chuba Hubbard, where you're going to have Omarion Hampton be capable of finishing as a top 6 running back in a Greg Roman offense, right? So, like, when you compare him to some of those guys, I would take Omarion Hampton over Chuba. I would take Alvin Kamara over Chuba, and Kamara's going half a round behind Chuba Hubbard right now. But when you look at Chuba Hubbard in a vacuum and you're comparing to some guys ahead of him like James Cook, I would take Chuba over James Cook. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag with Chuba right now. There's definitely a lot of pros and cons to what his current price is. If you want floor, if you want safety, I honestly think Chuba's ironically pretty safe. If you want upside, I think you're going to want to take a shot on someone else because I don't think he's going to necessarily win you a league at price anymore.
Okay, so this has turned into a not bust video pretty much. Okay, here's a guy who really could bust, Isaiah Pacheco. The real concern with Pacheco is, yes, last year he obviously suffered an injury, and so you really can't take last year and be like, okay, this is the reason. But I'm not going to take his actual like efficiency metrics because he averaged 3.7 yards per carry last year in 7 games on 83 carries. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use what actually happened. So what happened with him last year from a volume standpoint, which is indicative, I think, of kind of what they're thinking with Isaiah Pacheco. In weeks 1 and 2, he obviously had 15 and 19 carries, ran 14 and 11 rounds, so obviously he was doing pretty good. He had 100 yards in week 2, then got hurt, right? So he comes back in week 13, and he essentially plays the rest of the season after week 13. So he comes back, and they ease him in 7 carries in game 1, but then they give him 14 carries and 13 carries in weeks 14 15 against the Chargers and against the Browns. But what happens after this is the most interesting to me because obviously the Kansas City Chiefs going on another Super Bowl run, right? They didn't win this time, but as they go through the playoffs, starting in week 16 and 17, he obviously didn't play week 18 and 19. And so, maybe, honestly, if you want to just say this was all just because of the injury and he'll come back next year and he'll be what he was the year before. If you want to say that, sure, go ahead. I'm fine with it. But my thing is, even when he came back, his carries were declining. He was losing carries to Kareem Hunt. And maybe it was because he was injured. Maybe it was. But I've always been of the opinion I don't think Isaiah Pacheco is a crazy good back. Even in 2023 when he was super productive, he had 9 touchdowns, he had 900 yards. On a points per game standpoint, he was the running back 14. And so really the only thing separating him and what really took him to the next level from 2022 to 2023 was the receiving upside, right? He had the same pretty much yards per carry. He had only 100 less yards from 2022 to 2023. He had more attempts in 2023, but again, he was less efficient, and so he had about the same amount of yards. It was just receiving. He had 30 more receptions from 2022 to 2023. He had 110 more receiving yards, and he also had 4 more touchdowns. So his receiving and his touchdowns put up his points per game a ton. Now, obviously he missed time in 2023 as well. My point is, with Pacheco, I don't think he has a lock on that backfield. They brought back Kareem Hunt for a reason. They also brought in Elijah Mitchell. Pacheco has not always come out and kicked butt. Will he do that this year? Maybe he will. And I'll do that. But I do think at the current price he's going at, I'd rather take a shot on a rookie. He's going around Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, which those guys, whatever. Swifty, I would take Swifty over him pretty easily. Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins, I would take shots on before I take a shot on Pacheco. The Chiefs' offense from a running back standpoint giveth and taketh away because it can give guys like Brashard Smith, Isaiah Pacheco, like Carson Steele, opportunities at any time. But it also means if you're a starting running back there or if you're at the top of the depth chart, you are literally never safe. And Pacheco is somebody that I don't think he's secure. I don't think he's safe. And I think he could end up even just splitting with Kareem Hunt this year.
If he fumbles once, he's out.
They're not dealing with that. So,
Yep.
again, not all these guys are. Some of them are bust candidates, but you can talk about them if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Mason, I think, is going to be a huge bust this year. He's at RB31 prices right now, which you're like, okay, RB31, high-end running back 3, mid running back 3, sure. He's going a round apart from Aaron Jones, and I think that's the biggest point for me here, not to mention the guys that he's value equivalent to. Josh Downs at wide receiver, Hawkinson at tight end, Baker at QB, Egbuka, Pittman. You've got Kelsey and Mark Andrews going in this price range as well. Scadaboo, who I think is a really good shot to take this year in fantasy. Jordan Mason is effectively a running back 2 behind Aaron Jones, and I know like schematically Aaron Jones isn't a guy that's going to dominate snap share, but he does dominate the fantasy relevant opportunities, and you saw that with the A.J. Dillon experiment in Green Bay. You remember for years and years everyone was like, A.J. Dillon breakout season, A.J. Dillon breakout season, and he never could break through because he wasn't really that good of a running back, and Aaron Jones was just taking all of the fantasy relevant opportunity. And I think that's going to be the case here in Minnesota. Jones had a good year last year, and they extended him for 2 more years and expect him to be the top option again this year. There's always going to be the risk of injury, so I understand that point. But with Mason, with his ADP right now in the at 95.7, what is that, like the 8th round? You don't take a running back 2 shot in the 8th round. You're still playing with flex options and trying to fill out your starting lineup in your fantasy drafts when you're in the 8th round. You need a starter in that range, and it starts to get really sparse around there. You want to get a guy that you can rely on potentially to be a really good flex option, or if you decided to fade tight end until this point, you can take Kelsey or Andrews or something like that. Mason is not a guy that you want to take a shot on here. When you go RB2s, you start looking for those guys in the 13th, 14th round, not at Mason's current price.
So again, some of these guys were busts. Some of them, we don't think are going to be busts, but definitely these are guys I think people think could be busts, and we make the case for and against all of those. Let us know what you think in the comments about these guys, because they're definitely not sure things, especially where they're being drafted, and I think there's a lot of different opinions. But if you play fantasy football, make sure you drop a like, make sure you're subscribed. Those 2 things really help us out, and we really appreciate that. So we'll see you guys here soon. Peace out.